As I signed off from this program leading into Christmas last year, fires were dominating headlines right across the country. At the time, my viewers, you'll remember the very early rumblings about the Prime Minister's Hawaiian holiday, a family break he was forced to cut short as justifiable community anger grew with a sense he had deserted his post. Not fair or even factual, given that the states, under the Constitution and a myriad of other laws, have clear responsibility for bushfires in this country. But as the saying goes, well, truth is often the first casualty in war. Indeed, I reckon that quote needs updating. Truth is the first casualty in war, sure, but also any debate around climate change as well. So overwhelming is the misinformation campaign being forced upon Australians, as well as beamed all around the world, as we're being used as some sort of ready example of would-be climate Armageddon. And I want to repeat that term Armageddon deliberately. It's one of the many terms that's been bandied around over January by so-called journalists who should know better. Cataclysmic, unprecedented, worst ever, you get my drift. Descriptors used over and over again, only most of them are factually well wide of the mark. You see, while bad and tragic, with 29 lives lost and 2,900 homes destroyed, our summer of bushfires is not the worst we've ever seen. Nor are these fires unprecedented, meaning without precedent or some sort of biblical end of the world. To put this summer's bushfires into perspective, as devastating as they have been to date, over 10 million hectares have been burned. Now, by way of comparison, during the dreadful fire season over the 74-75 summer, more than 117 million hectares were burnt across Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, WA and the Northern Territory. Or as more simply expressed, then as opposed to now, 10 times more land was burnt than was seen to date in the current season. And while losing 29 lives over the past few months is 29 lives too many, in Victoria's 2009 Black Saturday fires, we lost 173 people. And in the Ash Wednesday fires in '83, the death toll hit 75. So this summer, tragic, yes. Unprecedented, sadly, no. Not even close. But when has fact and truth ever been a requirement in any debate where climate change is a central issue? Because that's where we're at now, like it or not, factual or not. Climate change and bushfires, we're told, are one and the same thing. And evidence-based scientific fact, well, it's almost universally misrepresented. Take this comment from the opposition leader Anthony Albanese, which he posted on Twitter in December. He says, "We can see, smell and feel the changing climate. But our government says we're only imagining it. Some of our most experienced firefighters couldn't even get the ear of this government to warn them about the fire season." And his language is deliberate because here he is again in a media conference saying the same thing late last week.
Well, you can smell it, you can feel it, you can see it. The impact of climate change and the devastating effect it's having.
Of course, the scientific fact is that carbon dioxide, the demon in climate change emissions, can't be seen, it can't be smelt, and it can't be touched. As any student of high school chemistry can tell you, carbon dioxide is a trace gas with no colour and no scent. And even though it's demonised in environmental terms, it's also a biological fact that CO2 is essential for human existence. By trying to conflate smoke from the bushfires with visual evidence of climate change, the Labor leader is banking on ignorance for political gain. So let me deal with the issue head on. Does climate change cause these fires? No. No fire can start without an ignition point, and no fire can burn without oxygen and fuel. Lightning strikes and arson are overwhelmingly the triggers for bushfires in this country, and excessive fuel loads are what's made them so much more intense ever since we gave up doing what we once did and what Aboriginal Australians have done for tens of thousands of years, and that's manage down fuel in our forests to protect human and animal life. George Orwell once wrote, and I remarked yesterday about it in my newspaper column, that, and I quote, "The further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it." It's like he was writing about climate change, wasn't it? In this debate, like few others, fact is often replaced with misinformation, analysis with hysteria, evidence-based assessments with mere anecdote, or lectures from teenagers. And balance and sober discussions, well, they're long dead. I bet over summer, if you tried to have a reasonable, fact-based conversation on this subject or the fires more broadly, it would have completely and quickly descended into regurgitated dogma, hysteria, or worse, the cult-like conversation so dominating our national debate. Anyone who wants to point out that Australia's 1.3% of global emissions, the total, are exceeded each year by China's increases alone is not just wrong, which of course they're not wrong, but according to the activists, they're somehow morally bankrupt. A little later on tonight, I'll be joined here by two former fire science experts, one from the CSIRO and another a forester. And between them, they have 100 years of bushfire expertise. Let's hear what they have to say about how we got here and how we now can turn this fire risk around before the next summer arrives. It's information every Australian needs to hear and understand. If we want to prevent future fire seasons of this magnitude, rather than just wring our hands and cry climate change, then Australia, we have got to have an honest debate. You see, it doesn't matter how much Morrison does or doesn't do on climate change, it's never going to be enough for the Green Left and anyone who's been brainwashed on this subject. This is why the government gets no credit for the fact that we're well on track to meet our Paris commitments and have been for some time, unlike countries such as Canada, France and Germany, which pandered to the climate cult but inevitably failed to deliver on their carbon commitments. Now, the PM's answer to his summer of political pain is a bushfire royal commission. Now, I'm not so convinced. All that does, to my mind, is push the issue off for another 2+ years in the hope, what? That we're somehow going to forget about it? No chance. The PM's been badly wounded here, and rather than step up the fight and sidestep the issue, he's got to tackle it head on. Instead of trying to outbid Labor on climate change, a fight he can never win, the Prime Minister needs to drive this issue into areas where the government can make changes now that will reduce the severity of future fire seasons. In almost every fire inquiry of recent times across state after state, the call has been for more hazard reduction burns. In the 5 volumes of the 2009 Victorian Bushfire Royal Commission that I took the time to read over the past few weeks, the commissioners recommended burning 5% of the state's forests every year. At the time, the state government promised to implement the recommendations, as all governments do. But last year, just one third of the burn target was met. Yet somehow, a piece of paper signed in Paris is behind these fires, not what our experts and others failed to do. If Scott Morrison wants to turn this debate around, he's got to get it off climate change and onto fuel reduction. If the states really are so keen to see the Commonwealth upend the Constitution and take more responsibility for bushfires, then Prime Minister, give them what they want. Establish a new national fuel load reduction plan and make it a standing item on COAG with reduction data published quarterly, transparently, publicly, so everyone out there can see it, so we in the media can report on it. And let's ensure that states that don't do what the experts recommend, let's get them named and shamed. Now forget everything else a national hazard reduction plan and publicly disclose information. Now that would be unprecedented.